I've been waiting months for the Bumblebee movie to be released on Blu-ray so I could finally go through with a fine-toothed energon comb and find all the juicy little facts, tidbits, Easter eggs, and other nuggets of trivia buried in this film. And now I have. So I present to you 87 facts that you may not have known about the Bumblebee movie. Why 87? I don't know, seems like an appropriate number. I certainly wasn't going to do a 1987, so let's get started. Like most of the other live-action Transformers movies, the transformation sound plays during the Paramount title. This one, however, uses a much more G1 sounding version. The first clearly visible Transformer on screen is Ratchet. Like the rest of the Transformers in this film, he's much more G1 in appearance than he was in the previous Michael Bay movies.
Ratchet. The boy's pheromone levels suggest he wants to mate with the female,
reflecting this film's 80s style. He is followed by Ironhide, who in the original series, and most others that followed, would share the same mold as Ratchet, as they do here. Next is Brawn, who in G1 was a minibot like Bumblebee. Then it's RC, who debuted in the original 1986 Transformers animated movie, and is probably the most well-known female Transformer there is. RC is played by Grey Griffin, who also played RC, Chromia, and Elita 1 in Revenge of the Fallen, as well as Glowstrike in Robots in Disguise 2.0. Next is Cliffjumper, who, like Bumblebee and Brawn, was originally a minibot in G1. And like Ironhide and Ratchet, Bumblebee and Cliffjumper would often share the same mold over the years. Also of note is that RC and Cliffjumper kind of had a thing in the Aligned continuity, and here we can see them standing next to each other, possibly a reference to Transformers Prime, or just a coincidence. The next Transformer shown is Wheeljack, who was actually the first Transformer to ever appear on screen in the original series, alongside our star, Bumblebee. Like his G1 self, Jackie's ears flash when he talks. Wheeljack is played by Steve Bloom, who's been in countless cartoons and video games, including Transformers ones. Most notable among them are probably his roles as Starscream in Transformers Prime and Heatwave in Rescue Bots. There are several generic Autobots present here to help fill out the ranks, including one that we see pass between Ratchet and Ironhide before getting blown back behind Brawn. It's kind of hard to tell in the film, but from the concept art, these guys seem to be based on the Ironhide and Ratchet model. We see Brawn take a hit similar to the one that he did in the original animated movie. Thankfully, he survives this one. The Decepticon Seeker that Optimus Prime throws appears to be Thundercracker, judging by his color scheme. When Bumblebee crashes into the Seekers, we see a green one and a blue one. Since Thundercracker just got knocked out by Optimus, this is probably not him. It might be Bitstream, but more likely it's probably intended to be just a generic nameless Seeker like you'd so often see in the original series. Beside him is a green Seeker, who much of the fandom has thought to be Acid Storm, but according to the concept art, this is actually Thrust, which could be an homage to the Armada character of the same name, or maybe the name was changed during production, as we'll see later with another major character. Down below in the background we can see what looks like a red Seeker. Could this be Thrust? Maybe it's Redwing. The Seeker that Bumblebee kicks off the ledge, lands, and kicks the head off of, fans have thought to maybe be Blitzwing, but his coloring and head design do match up with the concept art for Skywarp. Here we see the first appearance of Soundwave, Starscream, and Shockwave. Soundwave commands the Decepticon forces to attack.
Decepticons, attack!
He is voiced by John Bailey, best known to longtime Transformers fans for voicing Optimus Prime in various fan animation projects.
Tell me, tiny mutant, what has happened? Where are the other Autobots?
I don't know how to put this. They're basically slag.
Before eventually hitting it big and actually voicing Optimus Prime for real in official Transformers media in the Machinima-produced Combiner Wars web series.
Do not make me regret this.
Shockwave here is also voiced by the epic vocals of John Bailey.
Destroy the launch pad! Let none escape!
She's only partly in frame, but behind Shockwave is actually Shatter before she travels to Earth. The tower that the Autobots run to and launch their escape pods from is actually based on the Cybertron Space Bridge Control Center in the original cartoon, where Shockwave would often hang out and receive guests, invited or otherwise. Unfortunately, even paused and in HD, the Cybertronian text is hard to read on the hologram of Earth that Optimus shows Bumblebee, but what I can make out is the large text, which does in fact say Earth. Like so much of this movie, the design of the planet Cybertron was directly based off the old school G1 cartoon. The film is set in the year 1987, which actually marked the end of the original series on television in the West, and the beginning of the Headmasters cartoon in Japan. On Earth, we see Agent Burns hanging out with his friend Danny Bell before Bumblebee crashes the party. Danny actually appears again in the motion comic included in the Blu-ray release. Danny Bell's name may be a reference to G1 character Daniel Witwicky and G1 voice actor Michael Bell. The first alt-mode Bumblebee scans is actually a Jeep, which is very similar, if not the same model, as the one that G1 Hound turns into. The Sector 7 soldiers in this movie can be seen using harpoon guns, which is something they'd also use in the first Michael Bay live-action movie. Bumblebee uses his blade to cut down a tree here, but it looks a little different than it does on the toys. No doubt it, as well as various other details on Bumblebee, were probably changed and tweaked up until the very last minute. Whereas Hasbro and Takara probably got started working on the toys as much as a year or so prior to that, so that they'd be ready in time to be on the shelves at the same time that the movie was in theaters. Another noticeable difference between the Bumblebee toys and his appearance in the film is that, for the most part, Bumblebee keeps his signature door wings down against his back during most of the movie, which is something the toys cannot do. The only main exception is when he's here in his Jeep mode and in the house scene. You may have noticed that Bumblebee's HUD isn't in Cybertronian. Wondering why? Well, if you look at the top here, it's because his localization setting is set to English.
We've learned Earth's languages through the World Wide Web.
How did he learn English without the World Wide Web? Well, if you look at either side of his localization setting, it says AM and FM. So did Bumblebee teach himself to speak English using the radio before he even lost his memory and met Charlie? There's various other little details in this HUD, such as other dashboard icons, a clock, speedometer, energon stores, and his OS, which is B127. So is that where Transformers get their names from? Their operating systems?
Where's B127?
Blitzwing, who is definitely not Starscream, is voiced by Transformers veteran and fellow Canadian David Sobolov.
Did you think you could hide?
Who is probably best known as the voice of Depth Charge in Beast Wars.
Raw energon, right through your twisted spark. Take it straight to the pit, you sickening piece of slag.
As well as Shockwave in Transformers Prime.
Remarkable. Yes, quite an act of providence.
In the Bumblebee movie, it's Blitzwing who is responsible for Bee losing his voice. Where in other fictions such as Transformers Prime, Cyberverse, and even ancillary fiction for the original live-action movie, it was always Megatron's doing. Blitzwing, much like his fellow Decepticons Shatter and Dropkick, is known for being a triple changer, but unfortunately in the Bumblebee movie, he dies before we get to see him in his tank mode. Here's an obvious one. Before taking a nap, Bumblebee scans what will be his alt mode for the rest of the film, a classic VW bug, the same vehicle mode as the original Bumblebee. The scene where we're introduced to Charlie is somewhat reminiscent of this scene from Back to the Future. This is probably intentional, not only to homage a great 80s film, but also to evoke that 80s nostalgia. Plus, Back to the Future and Bumblebee are kind of similar in the fact that they both star a teenager with a car that does some incredible stuff. When Charlie says good morning to the photo of her father, we can also see a photo of her with her swim team, foreshadowing that aspect of her character. Music, especially 80s music, is a huge theme of this movie. Charlie has countless cassette tapes and posters in her room of artists from that era. Music is what Bumblebee learns to talk with, and music is Charlie's connection to her late father, in addition to the car, of course. Otis takes karate classes, no doubt inspired by the Karate Kid movie, which got a lot of kids in the 80s interested in martial arts. When Shatter and Dropkick are interrogating Cliffjumper, the only information he'll give is his name and rank. This is a reference to the Geneva Convention, which states that prisoners of war are only required to give their name, rank, and serial number. Like his Transformers Prime self, Cliffjumper has had the unfortunate luck recently of dying early. The decision to kill off Cliffjumper specifically in this scene instead of another Autobot is probably because he's basically a red Bumblebee, making the Decepticon villains much more threatening because the same thing could easily happen to B. The book Ron gives Charlie has a foreword by Rei Yamamoto, who was the digital asset manager on Bumblebee. Uncle Hank refers to Bumblebee as a death trap. This is because, despite being cute, Volkswagen Beetles were notorious for being unsafe cars, even by the standards of the time. When Charlie rolls under Bumblebee and sees its face, this is no doubt a reference to the toys and how you can often clearly see a Transformer's head and other robot parts exposed on the bottom of the alt mode. When Dropkick arrives on Earth and crashes into the truck, as it's rolling over, you can see some strange cylinders bolted to the bottom left side of its undercarriage. These are what held the explosives that were used to actually flip the truck. There's even still smoke coming out of them. When Dropkick pops Ray, it looks like he turns into goo, but it's actually the water that was in his body, at least according to the accompanying motion comic. Memo is reading a GoBots magazine when he sees Charlie in the morning. There was also a deleted scene where Memo comes to the conclusion that Bumblebee must be a GoBot.
A GoBot?
Yeah.
Like the children's toy? No.
There was actually a real GoBot that turned into a yellow beetle just like Bumblebee. It was Bugbite. He was a renegade, the bad guys of the GoBots. And after the GoBots, along with the company that made them, Tonka, were bought out by Hasbro, the same character of Bugbite would find his way into Transformers fiction, as an evil white repaint of Bumblebee who came from an alternate dimension. The Sector 7 agent who rushes the report to Agent Burns is a young Seymour Simmons, John Turturro's character from the previous Transformers movies. Charlie teaches Bumblebee to hide from humans by turning into his car mode. This was soon homaged in the first episode of Rescue Bots Academy. When Shatter and Dropkick are scanning their alt modes, their HUDs are in the Decepticon language rather than the far more common Autobot language. Again, some of the small lettering I can't quite make out, but I can tell that it says nav up here, scanning, and then complete. Shatter's design is based on Nightbird, not actually a Cybertronian, but instead a giant ninja robot created by Dr. Fujiyama, the famous scientist, although she would later be reprogrammed and rebuilt as a Decepticon, and even picked up a couple alt modes later on, a car mode and a swan mode, kind of making her a triple changer too in her own right. In her concept art, Shatter is actually named Fracture, which is the name that the female renegade GoBot Crasher goes by in Transformers lore, and is probably what inspired Shatter's red color scheme. Man, there's a lot of GoBots references in this Transformers movie. Dropkick's design was actually based on G1 Megatron. I know it's hard to tell in the final movie, but previous concept art depicts him with his head inside the rotor section, making it look like he's wearing a very big, very G1 Megatron helmet. They obviously scrapped the helmet eventually, probably because it was either too on the nose or just too ridiculous. You can still kind of see it as that part is now behind his head instead of his head being inside it. Shatter says the line, "Take me to your leader."
Take us to your leader.
A common science fiction catchphrase and popular cliché often used for parody.
What are these?
Take me to your leader.
Take me to your leader. Oh, wait, I am your leader.
Brilliant. Take me to your leader.
In the final movie, Optimus Prime is obviously voiced by the legendary Peter Cullen, but in at least one of the trailers, they actually used the scratch track for Optimus Prime, provided once again by the epic voice guy John Bailey.
I pray this message finds you. Our war rages on.
Soundwave says, "Ravage eject."
Ravage, eject.
A common catchphrase which Soundwave is pretty well known for. Unlike in Revenge of the Fallen, where Ravage was shot out of Soundwave as a missile, here, Ravage ejects just like he did back in G1, out of Soundwave's chest, complete with G1 transformation sound as he changes from a cassette-like rectangle into his beast mode. Although it most certainly is Ravage, his coloration here is more reminiscent of one of Soundwave's other cassette minions, Laserbeak. During this flashback, as Optimus is being surrounded by Decepticons, we can spot Shatter and Dropkick coming up behind him, who are obviously here to throw down before pursuing Cliffjumper and traveling to Earth. Bumblebee is watching The Breakfast Club. Specifically, we see the ending with Judd Nelson doing the Bender salute, which Bumblebee imitates. Judd Nelson would later go on to star in Transformers the movie as Hot Rod / Rodimus Prime, a role that he would later return to in Transformers Animated, Titans Returns, and Power of the Primes. Charlie tries to Rickroll Bumblebee. Agent Burns points out the obvious.
They literally call themselves Decepticons. That doesn't set off any red flags?
Shatter and Dropkick invented the internet.
They're creating an interconnected web of information.
By the way, there's more Decepticon script here. Shatter is working on something that says sector map up at the top here, and over by Dropkick, I can make out the word detection. Bumblebee learns to use the radio to talk, just like in the first Michael Bay movie.
XM satellite radio.
Digital cable brings you
broadcasting system. So you talk through the radio?
This movie actually has a lot in common with the first one. At its core, it's basically a movie about a kid and their first car, which just so happens to turn out to be a giant transforming alien robot from outer space. Bumblebee plays The Touch by Stan Bush.
You got the touch!
A song fondly remembered by longtime Transformers fans due to its use in the original animated movie, and has become the official unofficial anthem of Transformers. This one might be a bit of a stretch, but when Bumblebee, Charlie, and Memo are TPing the Mean Girl's house, they are using Charmin toilet paper. In the Weird Al song Dare to Be Stupid, there is a bar that goes, This song would also be used in the original animated movie, and Weird Al himself would go on to play Wreck-Gar in Transformers Animated.
I am Wreck-Gar! I dare to be stupid!
And Bumblebee does indeed squeeze that Charmin. The Pico Tunnel, as it's called in the movie, where they have the police chase scene and Bumblebee squishes himself, is actually the observatory tunnel in Griffith Park, which leads to the Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles. And it's a very popular tunnel for movies. It's been used in Back to the Future 2, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and War Games. As the Decepticons and Sector 7 roll out of their base, we can see that it's the Hoover Dam, the same location as the first live-action movie. We already know from his love of GoBots that Memo is a big nerd, and we love him for it, but in his room we can spy a bunch of Atari games, a model ship from Battlestar Galactica, and a collection of superhero action figures with a sign that says "Do Not Touch." Yep, Memo would fit right in with the Transformers fandom. Charlie uses the stun guns as a defibrillator to revive Bumblebee. It's not explicitly explained, but I think her mom being a nurse has something to do with the idea. Charlie's actress, Haley Steinfeld, even wrote a song titled Back to Life inspired by this moment, which plays during the ending credits. Agent Simmons is actually in this scene, but he's a little hard to spot. You can just barely see him exiting the Humvee, which he was driving with Agent Burns in. Very briefly as the C4 guy is unraveling the wire, again when Burns is counting, and finally when entering the smoky recently blown out bay. Just before Charlie and Bumblebee roll out to fight the Decepticons, we see Memo has a really nasty cut on his arm. This was actually censored in some markets, probably because it was too graphic for the movie's rating in those regions. While pursuing Bumblebee, Agent Burns has the line,
"You lose that car, I will personally rip your face off."
Possibly a reference to the end of the Revenge of the Fallen movie, in which Optimus Prime says,
"Give me your face."
As Bumblebee gets ready to leave Charlie, he looks down at the Golden Gate Bridge and scans a new alt mode, a Camaro, the same car that he first appeared as in the 2007 movie.
Oh, you gotta be kidding me!
You kidding me?
As Bumblebee rolls out down the Golden Gate Bridge, he drives beside a truck, which is no doubt Optimus Prime in perfect G1 style, complete with trailer. And finally, when Optimus commends Bumblebee on a job well done, we see the other Autobots entering the atmosphere in an image that is very reminiscent of the arrival to Earth scene from the first live-action movie. Well, that's 87 facts about the Bumblebee movie. What did you think about the Bumblebee movie? Were there any facts that I missed? Let me know down in the comments. And remember to like, subscribe, share, all that fun stuff. And hopefully I'll see you back here again for more Transformers news, reviews, trivia, and discussion. See you then.